Welcome to this week's Resilience by Default Deep Dive podcast. Today, we're really setting the stage for a crucial strategic briefing, and it's tailored specifically for you, our executive audience, board members, and risk leaders. We're looking at how operational resilience is evolving, and I mean evolving rapidly right across the globe. We're officially moving away from, just good intentions and narrative reassurances and heading straight into an era of hard, demonstrable evidence. And guiding us through this are some absolutely phenomenal, forward-looking insights from Terry.
So in this explainer, we're going to unpack the actual realities of modern regulatory expectations and those massive systemic risk pressures. It's just not enough anymore to have a plan jotted down somewhere in a folder. We'll explore exactly what it takes to elevate your organization's capabilities so you can actually meet the complex demands of the future. The real goal here is authentic discovery, right? Figuring out how to ensure that you aren't just barely surviving unexpected disruptions, but that you're genuinely prepared for them at a deep structural level.
Okay, here's our strategic roadmap for today. We've got 6 key areas to hit. First, the shift in resilience. Second, quantifying impact and harm. Third, mapping the modern ecosystem. Fourth, regulator-credible scenario testing. Fifth, evidenced governance and culture. And finally, building a globally coherent future. So let's just dive right into the journey from baseline industry practice to a truly forward-looking, evidenced resilience capability.
Section 1, the shift in resilience. Let's just jump right into the fundamental transformation happening right now and how businesses and regulators are viewing this entire discipline, which is really being driven by a massive emphasis on consumer protection.
Terry points out a definitive shift here that every single board absolutely must understand. Now, historically, we relied pretty heavily on continuity planning, right? It was static, heavily operational, and let's be totally honest, it usually lived in a dusty binder on a shelf that was maybe open once a year for an audit. Well, that dusty binder approach has completely failed in recent years because modern disruptions just happen way too fast for static plans to keep up. Today, resilience has decisively moved beyond that reactive posture. It is now recognized as a strategic organizational capability. But what does that actually mean in practice? Well, it means resilience has to be deeply embedded into your daily governance, your long-term investment strategies, and your core decision-making. It's absolutely no longer an afterthought or a box-ticking exercise. It's literally a foundational pillar that dictates how you protect your outcomes, your market integrity, and most importantly, your customers in an unpredictable world.
Section 2, quantifying impact and harm. This brings us to the second phase of this evolution. We're stepping into a regulatory environment where, frankly, simply telling a good story is no longer going to cut it.
Terry really emphasizes that impact tolerances are now absolutely central across all the major global regulatory frameworks. Whether you're looking at financial authorities like the FCA and PRA in the UK, broader cybersecurity regulations like DORA in Europe, or critical infrastructure directives like NIS2. But what exactly are they? Basically, impact tolerances are the explicitly defined thresholds at which a disruption to your services goes from being a mere inconvenience to becoming entirely unacceptable. And here's the kicker. You have to measure this unacceptability directly through the lens of potential harm. We're talking about harm to the consumer who relies on your service, harm to the customer whose whole business might halt, harm to the market stability, and ultimately systemic harm that could ripple out through the wider economy. So there's a really stark contrast here that executive leadership absolutely needs to grasp. On one hand, we have narrative definitions. Terry warns us that relying on qualitative narrative definitions actually weakens supervisory confidence. And why is that? Because regulators read these vague assurances, phrases like, "We are committed to robust recovery," and they immediately see red flags. They know that good intent doesn't magically stop an IT outage. On the other hand, we have what's actually required today: quantified and validated metrics. The crucial takeaway is that your strategic intent must be matched by measurable outcomes. Your impact tolerances literally have to be rigorously scenario tested and directly linked to real-world harm pathways. That's the only way to satisfy regulatory demands, actually prove your readiness, and justify your strategic investment decisions.
Moving on to Section 3, mapping the modern ecosystem. Look, to protect your critical services, you first have to understand exactly how they're delivered. And well, that introduces some massive complexities.
We really have to move past static documentation and those spreadsheets that are essentially out of date the exact moment you hit save. Terry outlines the absolute non-negotiable need for a living, dynamic, end-to-end operational model. When you map your critical services today, you've got to trace the full technology stock dependencies, from the front-end app all the way down to the physical server room. You need to understand those intricate data flows, highlight your concentration risks, like, say, relying entirely on a single cloud provider for all your critical storage. And you have to identify every single point of failure in the chain. This living dynamic mapping is the only thing that actually allows you to proactively inform change governance and make intelligent, risk-based decisions across your entire operational ecosystem. Our boundaries of responsibility have just massively expanded. Terry's perspective on this is crystal clear. Third and fourth party resilience is now fully fledged ecosystem risk management. It is completely unacceptable to just run a vendor through a simple procurement checklist once a year, file the paperwork away, and hope for the best. No way. You have to actively enforce resilient-specific service level agreements. You have to assess concentration risk all the way down your supply chain, knowing exactly who your vendors are relying on. And you absolutely must test your exit strategies for when those vendors inevitably face their own crises. The regulators' expectations here are accelerating so much faster than most organizations' actual capabilities, which makes this an absolutely critical area of focus.
All right, Section 4, Regulator Credible Scenario Testing. Once we've mapped out this incredibly complex ecosystem, we've got to validate it in a rigorous, quite unforgiving testing environment. Here's a really provocative question that every single C-suite executive should be asking themselves right now. Are your severe but plausible scenarios generating hard evidence, or are they just generating comfortable reassurance? Regulators expect operationally realistic testing. They're looking for demonstrable, repeatable capability. Not just a tabletop exercise where everyone sits around a boardroom with a nice cup of coffee and magically assumes the backup generator just fires up without a hitch. No, they want to see the friction, they want to see the failures, and they want to see your real recovery capabilities in action. So let's see how this actually builds into the modern risk landscape. Terry identifies the severe but plausible scenarios that you absolutely must use to truly validate your capabilities in today's world. We're not just talking about localized power outages anymore. We are talking about testing against systemic cyber events that cripple multiple regions at once. We're talking catastrophic cloud concentration failures that take out your primary and secondary data centers simultaneously, massive geopolitical disruption that freezes your supply chains overnight, and critical nth-party collapses, where a vendor you didn't even know was crucial suddenly goes bankrupt. These are the intense, operationally grounded tests that generate the raw, unvarnished evidence you need to validate your impact tolerances and secure that essential board-level funding. Section 5, Evidenced Governance and Culture. Now, testing is definitely vital, but let's shift our focus for a second to the internal structures and leadership behaviors that act as the true foundational enablers of resilience. There's a massive shift happening in board reporting right now. On one side, current board reporting often relies on narrative assurance, basically formatting a lovely green dashboard and telling the board that everything is fine. Carey notes that this is simply no longer adequate, and frankly, it actually poses a massive risk in itself. On the flip side, we have evidenced capability requirements. Now, this is what true decision-ready reporting actually looks like. Boards require clear, unvarnished visibility of actual tolerance breaches, hard data on scenario outcomes, uncomfortable vulnerabilities, and really clear dependency risks. Supervisors expect operational assurance that's supported by hard data, not just a comforting story wrapped up in a nice PowerPoint deck. But look, hard governance data doesn't just exist in a vacuum, right? It requires the right environment to be effective. We've got to stop treating culture like it's some abstract, soft concept. Terry insists that resilience culture must be treated as a measurable leadership competency. Effective response and rapid recovery demand specific, observable behaviors. Psychological safety isn't just some HR buzzword. It's what ensures your people aren't terrified to speak up the second they see a system failing. You need transparent escalation pathways so bad news travels incredibly fast. And you need strict cross-functional accountability so teams aren't just pointing fingers at each other during a crisis. These behaviors absolutely must be explicitly embedded into your leadership frameworks, your hiring practices, and your performance expectations. And finally, Section 6, a globally coherent future. Let's look at how all of this fits into the broader, converging, yet still incredibly fragmented global regulatory landscape. Ultimately, Terry's framework points to one vital strategic goal that cuts through all the noise of these complex global regulations. And that is the absolute necessity of building a globally coherent, unified operating model. Listen, if you try to manage FCA, PRA, DORA, NIS2, and the myriad of other global frameworks and isolated silos with totally different teams, you're going to be drowned in a massive inefficiency, and you'll practically be inviting supervisory challenges. Organizations that instead take the time to integrate these differing but converging expectations into one single unified model, well, those are the ones that will successfully navigate jurisdiction by jurisdiction risk, protecting their operations, their customers, on their markets seamlessly. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final, slightly uncomfortable, but really important question to think about. When the next major disruption hits, and it will, is your organization going to rely on a reassuring narrative, or will you stand firm on a foundation of undeniable, tested evidence? Honestly, it's the most important question your board can answer today. Podcasts released every Tuesday on Spotify and YouTube. Like, subscribe, and repost. It helps us build the channel and focus on what's important to you. On Tuesday, 9th June, the Resilience Association has its 6th annual summit. This year's theme is Critical Third Parties, Strengthening the Backbone of Resilience. Terry will be there,